Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Site Selectors Are People Too, the show that brings a personal touch to the world of site selection and economic development. I'm your host, Devin Hillsdon-Smith, and today's another installment of Stories from the Road. Pretty fresh off this one. Was just up in Jackson, Michigan over this past weekend, and I am pleased to say that we are joined by Keith Gillenwater, an economic development industry veteran who recently took his talents to Jackson, Michigan, abandoned the state of Indiana, and he now serves as the president and CEO of the Enterprise Group of Jackson. What's going on, buddy?
Things are going well. It was a pretty nice weekend we had, wasn't it?
It was too bad that the race got rained out, but we still had a good time. I didn't get too wet, didn't get too bad of a sunburn, so I can't complain.
Yeah, absolutely. It was, we got blessed with pretty good weather right up until, they tried to start the race.
Literally right up until they tried to start the race. Anyway, still a good time. We'll get into that here, but I wanted to start off because you've got a fascinating background, right? You are the definition of an economic developer, a nomad with a briefcase, right? This is your third community that you have served in. Is that correct? So you started LaGrange
yes.
in Indiana. You went to Wabash in Indiana. And like I said, you abandoned us and went up to Jackson. So what's that like, right? Because that's a typical path for an economic developer once you get into the local level. Right. What's that been like trying to reset your mind representing one community versus another?
So it was I started out working for the state of Indiana. I worked for the Office of Community and Rural Affairs as a community liaison. Okay. And that transition from that role into my first CEO gig in LaGrange County, there was a transition there, right? Because I went from selling government programming, essentially, trying to help my communities do that, to being in charge of one community and trying to do everything, right? Economic development, community development, being the CEO, having my own budget that I had to adhere to, and that kind of thing. So there was a big transition there, just learning the economic development side. From moving from one community in Indiana to another, you have to relearn some local customs, local processes, that kind of stuff. Obviously, the local people and flavor, but it wasn't that big of a transition. And so, for the last, 15 years, it wasn't that big of a deal. Now, I will say, moving from Indiana to Michigan, that's quite a bit bigger of a change, right?
Especially Michigan was the enemy. Right? Michigan was the enemy when you were in Indiana.
Well, I'm not going to say that we didn't actively market into Michigan, right, to try to get companies. And I have not done that yet into Indiana, but, eventually something's going to come up, right? I mean, it just will. So, but what I would say is going into a new state, it's a big change. So all of these programs that I have sort of known like the back of my hand, incentive programs from the state, how to do a tax abatement in Indiana, those kinds of things, all of that kind of gets turned on its head. The principles haven't changed, but how to do it, where to find the resources, who to talk to, all of that has changed. And then, there's obviously at the local level, for example, townships in the state of Michigan have a lot of sway. And in Indiana, townships, there was a report, 15 years ago that tried to do away with townships as a whole. So that's an interesting turn, because I have a lot of levels of local government at the community level to work with.
Yeah, a lot more. Right,
lot more.
You're dealing with a lot of localized power. And what did you tell us? How many cities, towns, townships do you have in your county? Do you remember?
Yeah, so I have 19 townships that all have their own local authorities. I also have 6 villages, a city, and then the county itself.
Yeah, that's a lot, man. And you're right. It's a big difference, right? And that's something I've learned on this side of the table. I knew Indiana like the back of my hand, right? I knew all 92 counties. I knew who was where. I knew how to navigate, all of that when I was in economic development, especially from my time at the state level. And now that I'm a site selector and I'm learning about all of these other states around the country, right? It really is fascinating how different we all operate.
It absolutely is. I mean, and I would say I came in with probably a little bit of a leg up on maybe somebody who was in a similar position and moving out of state, in that I've been on the board for the Mid-America EDC for several years. This is my
Right.
first year off of it. I was the chair of that organization. It's a 13-state organization that runs from Ohio to Wyoming, right? And so I have, between that and going to IEDC conferences or economics or any of these other opportunities for economic developers to connect with your profession, to connect with our peers, you kind of pick up some of these things. And so the nice thing was I had an opportunity when this position approached me, when Todd Jorgensen, the headhunter, had approached me about this position. I knew a couple of people from the Mid-America EDC board. I knew a couple of former Indiana peers who were in Michigan now, that I could reach out to and say, tell me about Jackson, Michigan, including the community, one of the gentlemen that we just partnered with on this FAM tour that we just did with you last weekend.
Yes, Timmy boy, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes.
Yeah,
Yep.
yeah,
So,
absolutely. Well,
yeah,
and the
so
other
Tim,
one, right? So somebody else that is a friend of the podcast, has been on before, Matthew Marshall, right? He's
yes.
you mentioned MADSI board, right? It's interesting how we're all in different communities in different states, and yet as a profession, economic developers are really good at coming together and getting to know each other, right? And putting up the united front. That being said, and I have to throw this out as a fun fact about you. And I want to transition this into a question I ask everybody because I think it's fascinating how you got into economic development. Before Okra, maybe way before Okra, Keith Gillenwater, you were a crime scene investigator.
I did some crime scene work. Yes. So I was a civilian employee for the Fort Wayne Police Department.
No, thank God they didn't give you a badge. Okay.
Oh
Yeah,
no,
keep
yeah.
going.
Like I think they saw the writing on the wall with that, right?
Right.
They, they may have known me when I was in college, right? So,
They're like, this dude really understands crime scenes. Let's have him be an investigator.
and not give him a gun. So
And not give him a gun. Specifically hide the guns from Keith.
yes. I can I see myself being Eric Cartman and respect my authority,
Yeah.
Anyways, so
how do you go from a crime scene investigator to an economic developer?
yeah,
man?
so I'll tell you. I did that job. As an undergrad, I was thinking I was going to go to law school. I ended up not going to law school. I got this job that was the most money I'd ever made at that point in my life, right? And had benefits and that kind of thing. And I was doing that job, and I did minor crime scenes. I had to go to the jail every night and fingerprint inmates and things like that. And I will say there were two things. One, the nature of the job started to change with the advent of digital cameras. When I started, I had a 35 millimeter Nikon, right? And so that, and you're thinking like, that seems like forever ago, but in my mind, it was 99, 2000, 2001, right? Like, and I was out of college at that point. But then the other thing was, I realized a few years into the job that that's not what I wanted to do.
Yep.
And I had this, I don't know, crisis of conscience or whatever that just said, I feel like I want to do something that would be more helpful to people. And because I didn't feel like I was doing anything that made a difference there. And I went back to school, started working on my master's, and through my master's program, met some folks that created some opportunities. And when then Governor Mitch Daniels got elected, created the Indiana Economic Development Corporation, created the Office of Community and Rural Affairs, and some of these other entities. There was an opportunity. They needed somebody in Northeast Indiana for the Okra position, and got introduced and got hired, and I was off to the races, right?
So you didn't really know what you were getting yourself into. It's just that from what you had heard, you felt as though it was a little bit closer to your calling to do more for your community.
I wanted to do something that felt like I was helping my community, because taking pictures of crime scenes and dusting for prints and going to the jail every night on the third shift didn't seem to be it.
No.
I will say, when I transitioned into into a purely economic development position, I couldn't have told you when I was in grad school what economic development was, or what it meant, or what somebody in economic development did. I did a little community development for the state and some economic development, but until you get the job, you have no idea what it is. And I assume I've heard you tell your story before on this podcast, right? I mean, until you do it, you have no idea what it is.
Absolutely. It is trial by fire. I mean, you effectively went back for another master's degree at LaGrange, right? Let's be real. That was effectively
absolutely.
what it was. It was boots on the ground, training.
Absolutely. Right? And I would love to see some of these universities now that actually are offering degrees, Southern Miss and some of these. I would love, so I've had some exposure to that program. I would have loved to have went through that as a degree program with my knowledge as a practitioner, just to see how close it is, right? Because I think it's fantastic. One of my mentors when I worked for Okra was the director of Okra at that time, the guy by the name of David Terrell. And, David had said to me on a number of occasions, I always thought this this Okra opportunity was the best internship program for all of my people to go off and become economic developers. And as I now can look back on that phrase 15 years, 20 years in, he was spot on. He was pretty spot on, right?
Well, to your point about you'd love to go through a practitioner's, go through like Southern Miss, their course, right, as a practitioner to kind of compare. Yeah. The interesting thing is about law school. You mentioned law school before. I went to law school, right? And what most law firms will say is that law schools are really good at training law students to become better law students. But when law firms first pick up brand new licensed attorneys, they realize that they have zero skills in the real world. They don't really know what they're supposed to do in a law firm, right? And so you're right. I think it'd be interesting to compare that to economic development to see what some of these new university programs, how they're teaching, what they're teaching, right? And is it more practical, right? Is it more practical so you actually have skills that you can hit the ground running with, or is it more academic, right? Does it focus more on the economic side of things, which we all need, right? I always laughed about the fact that at the Indiana Economic Development Corporation, we only had one economist, right? Somebody who had ever taken like economics courses. And yet we were the Economic Development Corporation. But anyways, flash forward now, and you've really drunk the Kool-Aid, if you will. You are, and I haven't had a certified economic developer on before. You are now, you have your CECD. You've been a certified economic developer for how long?
About 11, 12. Yeah. So I got to recert next year. So 11 years.
Gotcha. So what, for folks that either don't understand our profession or that are new to the profession, walk me through the CECD and kind of the value that it brings to our profession and to the individuals that work within it.
Yeah, absolutely. So as a young economic developer, I had the opportunity, thankfully I had a supportive board who bought into continuing ed, allowed me to go do the University of Oklahoma EDI, so the Economic Development Institute. So I had that opportunity, and so I did that over the course of 3 years. So kind of back in the day, the OU EDI would be offered twice a year. I think once a year it was usually at the campus at the University of Oklahoma. And for several years, they hosted the other session in Indianapolis. Yep. So as an economic developer in Indiana, it was something that I didn't have to fly to. I didn't have the budget to be able to do that, but I can drive to Indianapolis, right? And so I was very lucky with circumstances of being able to do that. So on a shoestring of a budget of a brand new EDO, right? And so I digress, but I had this opportunity. I went through EDI, and during that course of going through EDI, they talk a lot about you can sit to be a certified economic developer, and they went through the process of applying and the benefits and that kind of thing. And I thought, as a young economic developer, a few years into my career, going through this training program, I quickly realized this was a career I liked, right? This was a career that I was drawn to, and I had found what my place was. And so the next logical step to me was, well, I should become a certified economic development professional, right?
Yeah.
And so I started down that road, and I will tell you, it's a tough process. I mean, everyone has heard those horror stories and the low pass rate, and I will
Yep.
say EDI, or I will say the IEDC has made some changes to that over the year to make it a little, maybe not quite as of a bear of a process, but you still have to put the work in, right? And so, I was able to, with a partner, another economic development professional that was in Indiana at the time. That it's funny, neither one of us are in Indiana at this point, but really started studying together. There was a larger group by the time of people that actually made it to sit down and take the exam. It was just the last two of us, right? And we both passed, right? We both passed on the first try. But
Best on your first try.
We did. But I will say, we held each other accountable for 6 months, right, leading up to that process. So, but your question was why, right? Like, why did I do that, right? I thought couple of reasons. I thought, certainly, as I loved this profession and I knew that this was where I wanted to be, I knew that it wasn't ever going to hurt me to have a credential that not every economic developer does, right?
Yep.
And eventually I was going to change jobs, or there was going to be an opportunity, or God forbid, a community decides that they don't want you anymore, right? And I mean, which happens in economic development, right?
Oh, that's what happened in Wabash. You got run out of Indiana. Okay. All right.
All
right. For the record, Keith did not abandon Indiana. Indiana abandoned Keith.
That is that is not the story I've been telling people, but
Right.
I'm glad
I'm
that
gonna reinvent the story here.
I feel like I'm on Oprah. I feel like I'm on Oprah right now, and I'm gonna cry in about 2 seconds, right?
No. You're gonna cry when you tell me you're joking. I don't laugh.
You're gonna laugh.
Yeah. I'm sure I will. No, I was making it up. So here's what I love about the certification. Right? I never became a certified economic developer because I just had some folks around me that were telling me that it wasn't worth it, right? And for better or for worse, that's what I was told, and I didn't go for it. I also have too many letters in my name already and wasn't willing to add another one on the back end, right? But what I love about the certification is it is the International Economic Development Council's. It is a way. Here's what I'm getting at. Economic developers, anybody and their mother can become an economic developer, right? And the majority of economic developers are fantastic. What the certification does, though, is it helps to legitimize, I think, our profession a little bit more because there's a code of ethics, right, that you have to abide by. You have to go through continuing learning, continuing education courses, right? Very similar to me as a lawyer and a broker, right? I have to continue to go through these continuing education courses and check in on my ethics. So I think it does a great job at helping to legitimize the job as a profession, right?
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
Yeah, and the point I get to there is there's also, I've noticed, a parallel in site selection. There's a lot of people out there who call themselves site selectors, but they're not. There's no certifying governing body, right, that dictates who a site selector is. So sometimes you can have somebody reaching out to you that you've never heard of before. They're saying they're a site selector, and you immediately think you have to treat them properly. Not properly. You would always treat somebody properly, but you have to take them seriously, right? So I think that by having certifications and industry governance over both site selectors and economic developers is the way we kind of push this thing forward a little bit.
I would agree with that 100%. I mean, so, to your question, your question was, why would I do it? Right. And, the selfish reason that I thought at some point it would help me. Right. Whether it was a new job or whatever. But that other part is exactly what you just said. Right. it legitimizes my profession. It legitimized to my board that I knew what I was talking about, right? That
Right.
I could apply myself to something. It's just like, what do people look like, or when you're hiring somebody and you see somebody has a degree, what does that tell you, right? Does it tell you that they're an expert in business or business management or any of that stuff? It does not. What
No.
it does say is that person can set a goal, can work and put the work into it and accomplish it, right?
And they
And
seem to have enough of an interest in this field that they have some sort of background and education in it.
that's exactly right. And that's a CFD for me, right? And I'll also say it was very helpful, right? Because it forces you to become well-rounded as an economic developer, to work on things that, if you are you're an economic developer, but if the only thing you do is business attraction and wine and dine people for a regional group or something like that, versus you're an entrepreneurial support guy, but you're still the economic development guy, versus you're a community development guy for the economic development organization. There's a lot of flavors to this profession, right? And the thing with being a CFD is you have to be able to have a knowledge of all of that. You have to know how to do BRE. You have to have a background or some knowledge of real estate and economic development finance and managing an EDO and marketing and all of these different things. And that CFD says that you've dipped your toe into all of that.
You're well-rounded as a
You're a
professional, even if
practitioner.
you're a practitioner. Exactly.
That's
So
right.
bring this full circle back to the enterprise group, and then we'll take a break here. That was your entry, right? And you're a firm believer in you keep calling it a CXD, right? So I need to get that down. I just call it CECD, but I guess CXD
Yeah,
is
you're
easier
fine.
to say. So you have two brand new team members that you had to hire almost immediately
Yes.
when you started, right? And I won't get into the whole story, but effectively you came into the enterprise group in Jackson. Everybody was like, "Peace, we're out if this guy's in," and you had nobody around you. The positions were not filled, right? And so you had to go through and hire two new team members, right? Young professionals. Are you going to be advocating for, in particular, probably the project manager in economic development? Are you going to be advocating for your staff to go and take CXD courses?
Absolutely. So I have, when I was in LaGrange County, when I was in Wabash County, and now I have had every staff member I have ever hired, I have sent them to the basic economic development course. And, essentially what I've already said. So my new project manager, Emily, one of the first things I said to her was, give this profession a year, do the basic course, give it a year, see if this is something that you like. And if so, we will sit down and map out that course for professional development for you. I'm a big fan of EDI. You can certainly do the IEDC courses, but I like that. I like that format because it worked for me. And so we'll sit down and map that out and say, okay, here, over the next 3 years, you should be able to do that. At the end of that, you'll have your 4 years of paid economic development experience. You will have had all of the prereqs that you need, and you can start studying. And if this is the route that you want to go, then I am 100% supportive of you taking the exam.
Awesome. That's good to hear.
Absolutely.
And then one more personal point before we move on to break is,
Sure.
I called you a veteran in the opening, right? How's it feel? By veteran, what I really mean is you're one of the old guys now, right?
Absolutely.
But how does it feel now being in a position where you need to start giving back, right, to the profession and ensuring young professionals have a path forward, right? Because that's kind of your charge, right, at
Absolutely.
this point.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, not only with my internal staff, but through Mid-America EDC, I've been mentoring a younger economic developer in South Dakota for the last few years. Through that we connected through MADC. And so I honestly I embrace that role. It's something that I like to do. I mean,
I can
I
tell.
like to talk first off, right?
Yeah, right. Yeah.
But I had a lot of people who gave me a helping hand when I got into economic development that were able to mentor me, were willing to spend the time, who were willing to answer the questions. even in the 6 months that I've been in Michigan, I had a project this week that I was filling out an RFI for. I had another project this week that, came from an attorney and not from a site consultant, I think. And they were
And yet they
asking
were
me to,
kind of positioning as,
sending me
yeah.
wanting term sheets and things like that. And I'm like, so it's interesting because, I hadn't calculated a PA 198 yet in Michigan, right, which was our tax abatement law, and so like figuring out, all right, where do I find all of this stuff, how to calculate that out, and so I reached out to a handful of economic developers in the state and say, hey, is there a tool available? In Indiana, we were pretty blessed on a tax abatement because you could go to the Hoosier Energy site and look at the tax abatement calculator, and then 30 seconds have a printout of what it would be. Trying to find that tool that doesn't exist in Michigan, I will say. So being able to do that. And so I give back because people have given to me and continue to give to me. So I will continue to give to others.
And all jokes aside, right? It's such a cycle. There's if you love just continuously learning and finding about new things and never having a dull, boring moment, right? This is the right profession. Because
Absolutely.
even for yourself, right? I called you a veteran, and you are by all accounts, but you still had to reach out, and you're still learning, which is excellent. And what's important there is that unless you have good individuals around you in your community and you have those relationships, the cycle starts to break down. Right.
Right.
So with that being said, speaking of relationships, when we come back from the break, we're going to talk about how you build relationships with folks like site selectors through something called fam tours. Talk in a sec. All right, and we're back with Keith Gillenwater of the Enterprise Group of Jackson. All right, man. So I last saw you this past weekend, going to the weekend for the first ever FAM tour hosted by Lenawee and Jackson counties in Michigan, right? So a 2-county FAM tour. So we spent one day focused on Jackson, one focused on Lenawee, had the cap off event at the end, and some other events sprinkled throughout. I will tell you, and I said this to your face, and I'll say it again, that was one of the better FAM tours that I've been on. You guys did an excellent job. And so I want to dig into this because I think FAM tours have a certain reputation because I think they're not always done well, or they're just code for a boondoggle, right? And so it's just, you go and you're just having fun. There's really no business. You did a great job of the mix of business and fun, right? To get us all there and get us to understand your community. So from your perspective, what is the purpose of a FAM tour?
Absolutely. So I think a FAM tour is a fantastic tool for an economic developer to use to be able to expose a community that you may not ever have had a reason to come to and may not ever be top of mind for you when you're thinking about doing a project in Indiana, Michigan, wherever, right? And so the point for me is I get an opportunity to really build a strong relationship with you, show off my community, show you not only the things I want you to see, but we're spending 3 days, right? And so you get to see everything about my community. You get to ask those questions. And I have no doubt that as you leave, the hope is at least that as you leave the community at the end of that 2 days, 3 days, whatever that is, you have a good idea of what we can do. You have a good idea of what kinds of projects we can serve, what we can't, and you hopefully have a good relationship with me to know that I'm not going to try to sell you something that isn't a fit, right? So that's what you do. And as we were very intentional about who we invited to the tour, we were very intentional about the people we invited, knowing what kinds of projects that they work, right? You have to, there's a lot that goes into it, to the planning.
There's a lot.
But
there's a lot.
But I couldn't be happier with how it turned out, right?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, to your point about there's a lot, right? And I told Emily and Sarah, your two new hires, like, this is exhausting. And I want you to know, I mean, the rest of us, the site selectors on this tour, we've been economic developers. I know how much effort goes into making this as polished and as outstanding as it comes across, so that it feels so flawless that it almost seems like it was easy, right? There's a lot of logistics that go into it. There's a lot of collaboration, and to be frank, there's a lot of money, right? You have to pull together. You have to spend a lot of money to do some of these right. And but I think the value that comes from it is exactly what you said. It's to help create relationships, bring in site selectors. Oh, my dog's nest there he goes. Well, this is about humanizing the profession. That is my dog Archer barking in the background. But anyways, I digress. So you did it in an interesting way in that you partnered up with another county, right? But you also have to have a lot of partners out there behind the scenes, and your board, right? Your investors that are showing up. You have to get a company to open its doors to us. How do you go about collaborating with your partners to pull off a good fam tour?
Yeah, so I think from my standpoint, I tried to put myself in the shoes of Devin, right? Of what would Devin want to do if I was going to come here on a fam tour? How would I want to spend 3 days in Jackson County, right? How would I want to spend 3 days in Lenawee County in this region of South Central, Southeast Michigan, right? And so I think that's one thing. And so that helped shape it. And then I also, because I've been I'm a seasoned economic developer, right? I'm a veteran, or whatever you said earlier.
Good Lord, he is mad at something. What is going on?
Male's there. Yeah.
Yeah. All right, we're gonna take a quick break. I'm gonna put the dog outside for a sec. One second.
All right.
Well, that'll be a first. We'll see how we edit that one out. Or actually, I like to leave those types in, right? I think, and I'm just gonna keep rolling here. I'm just gonna cut back to it. And you can still hear him in the background. So Archer, as I've mentioned before, and he is the little dog that I'm holding in my podcast. He's going nuts. It's not even the mailman. It's the guys are outside trying to mow again. So, gotcha. It is what it is. He freaks out about everything. But that is so back to your saying before we were so rudely interrupted by my puppy. So you try to put yourself in the shoes, in my shoes, right? The person who's going to be experiencing the fam tour. How do you educate those who we are going to interact with? How do you educate them beforehand on who we are and what we're trying to get out of this fam tour?
That's a great question. So stepping back just a little bit, this is the first fam tour that Jackson County has ever done, right? And I think it was the first fam tour that Lenawee County had ever done as well. And so,
So for a correction here, I thought this was just the first one the two had come together on. You're saying that this was the first one the community's ever hosted, potentially.
Absolutely.
Okay, so the question's even more relevant. Continue.
Yeah. And so when I started here, we started talking about with my board about, all right, what are we going to do different, right? What are these things? What is my strategy as an economic development professional coming in to try to help sell projects? We had just put a bunch of money into building a new tech park that you saw, Jackson Technology Park North. How are we going to start filling that, right? How are we going to get some wins out of that park? How are we going to, just do all of the things that a board expects the new economic developer that they just hired to do, right? And so we had, when I presented this idea to them and said, hey, we have this asset. So we have this asset that we share amongst two counties, and that is the Michigan International Speedway. It has a big country music concert, a big music festival, and it does a NASCAR race. So have we ever used that asset that we have to try to really foster some economic development activity in the community, right? And the answer that I've gotten to that is, well, we've done a little bit in the past, but not in several years, right? And when I dive into, the idea of a fam tour, that wasn't something that we had done. And so, we started kind of talking through that process. I was very lucky in that we share that asset of the Michigan International Speedway with Lenawee County. So as Tim, if you were to talk to Tim, he in the same podcast, he would tell you he's got 3 of the 4 turns there. So he's got 3/4. He's got 3/4 of it, but we've got 1, right?
Yeah.
And that's all we needed. So
That's all you needed.
And so I reached out to him. Tim and I had served on the Mid-America EDC board together for, I think, 6 years, had become friends, and he was one of the reasons I came to Michigan, because I called him when the gig became available, and they had reached out to me to say, hey, tell me about Jackson County, right? Is this a good opportunity? And so he's partially the reason I'm here. And so I told him what I was thinking. He said, this is a great idea. And then we sat down, started writing it out. Right. I will say a little bit of an education process with my board and some of my stakeholders. This was something also, as you mentioned, it is not free to host a FAM tour. And so I had some money set aside that I could pay for it, as did Tim. But it gave us an opportunity to reach out to some of our partners, like our utility partners, and even one of my board member organizations, to say, is this something you could help us with the underwriting, because we know that there's going to be these expenses for it. As you can imagine, you're doing a suite at a racetrack for a NASCAR race. There's a cost associated with that.
Wasn't exactly $50 a head. Yeah.
It was not exactly $50 a head. There's a cost associated with dinners and foods and the fun things that you do, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we wanted to make sure that, like, we're cognizant of you giving up a weekend. I'm sorry about that. My phone was ringing.
I didn't hear that. Archer is still barking. Like, I don't know what is going on. I don't know how he has gone on this long, but I swear. Anyways, it's all good.
So we're cognizant when we're asking 3 or 4 site consultants to come up, that we're asking them to give up a weekend. So there's a opportunity cost for you, right? You give up time with your family, you give up time with your dog, you give up time with work, right, of things. And so, like, we had to make it worthwhile. And so it can't be, I mean, if I would have put you in a van for 3 days and just showed you industrial sites and buildings, which I could have, you would have been like, great. No, I don't want to do that. Right.
Which is why I'm saying it is surprising to me how many communities host FAM tours, and what you just described is what we go through. Right. And so the problem is, and what, I'm not saying that it is your job on these to wine and dine us, but you need to make it memorable. Because if it's just driving around in a van looking at warehouses, or just sitting in an office and going through PowerPoints, I'm going to confuse that with a number of other FAM tours that I've been on. And then the money that you've expended to have us come to town was probably wasted, because we're not walking away with something memorable, right? What I thought was great about the way that you conducted yours was it was very low pressure, right? It was a good mix. We saw some really cool companies where we were able to tease out some of the benefits of doing business in the community, one of which we learned, the origin story of how they moved from California to your region. We did I'm never going to forget us being on the pontoon boat and the cover going down and under, right, wrapping up in the motor, and us going, oh my gosh, what do we do? We're in the middle of the lake, right? Never going to forget things like that. Never going to forget, when I first heard, I had never been to a NASCAR race. When I first heard those cars start up and started going, right, and you had leaned to me, you're like, oh, you want some earplugs? And I was like, no, I'm good. Come on, what the heck, you baby? And man, I tried to tough it out, but that was deafening. Right, very different from an Indy car, but yes. Things like that, right? That's the point, to make it memorable, and for us to not just walk away with a hangover, but walk away with some information about your community as well.
Yeah. So, I mean, one of the consultants that was here this weekend, I don't remember if it was you, and I'm sorry if it was, but mentioned one of the FAM tours that they were on. There was a 14-hour meeting. Yeah,
that was me.
Yeah, PowerPoints for 14 hours, right? Essentially,
with 2 5-minute breaks.
And like, I can't imagine doing that as a normal day at my office, right? Let alone in a community I'm not familiar with people I don't know, with like that's I mean, that was the hardest part of COVID for me, right? Was
Yeah.
Zoom meetings, like being on Zoom meetings over and over. It's fine. It's a great tool for an hour meeting here and there, right? But oh, geez, I couldn't have done it, right? Yeah. Anyways, um, I will say done right. You know, since just this week, I mean, we got done on Sunday. People left on Monday, and we still have text strings going that you're part of, right? With jokes from over the weekend, right? And it's
JG Wentworth 877 cash now.
so I mean, it's I think that's a sign that we did something right, as a
Amen.
community, because we're still talking, and the fam tour has been over for a few days, right?
Definitely, man. Absolutely. Okay. Very good. No, I think that was important because, and I want to transition this into one other question on the topic. We're going to take one more quick break, come back. I just want you to talk about, Jackson and the future of Jackson for a moment, and then we'll call it. The question I wanted to pivot to here on fam tours is that's obviously one tool, right, for building relationships between communities and site selectors. You, Keith, I've noticed over the years, you're very good at building and maintaining relationships. You've talked about mentorships, right? You've talked about how embedded you've been within your communities. What is, just from a fundamental level, what advice would you give to new economic developers that are trying to build relationships with corporate decision makers and site selectors on the other side of the table?
Oh, that's a great question. I think the biggest piece of advice is you can't be afraid to pick up the phone. You can't be afraid to ask for help, and you can't be afraid to approach somebody at a networking event to introduce yourself, exchange a business card, and have that interest in what they're saying to actually try to build a relationship, right? It's a tough thing to do. And, I will say, like, growing up, I'm the exact opposite of what I was growing up, right? Like I was, I was the fat kid that didn't want any attention to himself, right?
You were shy?
Yeah, I know, it's shocking, right? It's shocking, right? And you fast forward to, I'm 47 years old, right? And I love talking to people. I love doing karaoke at a conference, right? I love going to the casino with somebody on an event, right? I love doing this kind of thing. I'll give you a perfect example, right? I went for the Midwest U.S. Japan Summit in Tokyo last year.
Yep.
A community delegation from Wabash had attended that, right? And at the event, there was a networking set aside, and I will tell you, of the, I don't know, 8 states or whatever that make up that Midwest region for the U.S. Midwest Japan. There were maybe 5 Americans that stuck around for this networking event, right? And 3 of them were from Wabash, and one of them was from our Northeast Indiana regional group, right? And then there was a guy from another state. And so you have some of these Japanese executives that are there, including guys that had speaker ribbons on. Well, these guys that they have speak at this conference, it's not the low-level staffer, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like I spent 25 minutes standing there talking to the chairman of the board of Kawasaki, right? And that is not a meeting that I could have ever gotten sending a cold call, right? We exchanged business cards. His business card has no contact information on it, right? The guy that's with him has a card that has contact information on it, right? And so, like, it's that kind of thing. And we talked about Kawasaki. We talked about them making subway cars for New York City in the middle of, I think, Nebraska, right? We talked about EV and how EV, yeah, that's important to them, but they're looking at hydrogen, right? They're looking at hydrogen for Kawasaki. That's where they're putting their eggs, right? Just things like that. And that's because over the years I've developed the personality, I think, or the demeanor to be able to say, you know what, I'm going to go up and introduce myself. I'm going to exchange cards. I'm going to have a conversation. And that was such a missed opportunity. And I'm like, yeah, like you wouldn't have gotten that if you didn't do it, right?
I think they're, especially for new, younger economic development professionals, I think you're so afraid to walk up to a site selector or to a corporate decision maker and start talking. You're afraid they're going to grill you and ask you questions that you don't have answers to, right? And you're going to be you have that fear of being embarrassed by lack of knowledge. Whereas I'll tell you, I mean, I love it when I'm talking to an economic developer, a new one, and I ask a question and they're kind of fumbling and they don't know the answer and they actually admit they don't know, because then that opens up a line of communication between us, right?
Yeah.
Because then I can give them my thoughts and I can, I almost immediately step into that mentorship, persona, because I see an opportunity to help this person. It's not like you're going to get brushed off by a site sector. Well, you don't know what you're talking about. Have a good one, walk away. Do exactly what you just talked about, right? Just put yourself out there in this profession and get to know people at a human level, right? So you were talking about, what direction with EV and hydrogen. I mean, the other piece of advice that I would give to folks is just, get to know the person behind the name, right? Stop trying to just suck up to these folks and think that they're going to remember you. That's what everybody does, right? Ask them personal questions. Talk to them.
So can I tell you the bookend of that
Yeah.
the front end of that story? So I was being professional and telling you about the EVs and the hydrogen vehicles. You want to know what the first 5 minutes of our conversation was about? His exposure of Kawasaki in the United States and how the movie Top Gun and Tom Cruise riding a Kawasaki Ninja, how much that opened up sales for Kawasaki and brand recognition, because that was such a popular thing, and how the next Top Gun movie is, because he's still riding the same bike, was having a hit for them again. And then I also told him that my father has a Kawasaki Mule at home, which is their side-by-side, right? Their UTV. And that was the entree of our conversation.
That was the intro.
And then that led into corporate strategy around hydrogen vehicles.
So
that's absolutely God's honest truth.
I'm gonna have to go back and watch Top Gun. I haven't seen the first one in a very long time, and I hate to admit I haven't seen the second one.
Oh, Devin, you have no idea what you're missing.
I do, because I get this reaction from everybody.
I gotta turn my camera off because I can't even look at you now.
Here, I'll turn mine off. You don't have to do anything. Jeez, man. I was wondering how long you could stand staring at this shirt. No, but I mean the relationships, right? And us being able to just have this candid, just off the wall conversation, right? But tease out some ideas, right? It's because you and I have developed a relationship over the years. Absolutely. And it's just it becomes natural. And I hope you know that you could always pick up the phone, call me, and go, hey, I hear Project so and so is running around in Michigan. Is that something, right? Like, you build a relationship and you keep it strong, and on the back end, we need to yield dividends from our relationships in this industry, right? But the point is us having a good enough, strong enough relationship that we can make each other better by being a little more transparent and candid. Plain and simple. Good. Absolutely. All right, we're going to break, and I want to talk about Jackson for a bit. We don't need to talk about the casino. All right, we'll be back. All right, and we're back. So we're going to pivot as we always do in the third leg of the Stories from the Road. I had the fantastic opportunity to explore and get to know Jackson last week and over the weekend, right? But for those that have not had the opportunity to do so like I have, Keith, I wanted to give you an opportunity. I know you're new to the community, right? So this is going to be a bit of a dialogue here, but explain to me, what is the ethos of Jackson? Who is Jacksonville as a person?
Yeah, so Jackson County is. I'm going to borrow from a previous state that I worked in, Indiana, because I thought that the brand that the state of Indiana used for several years was fantastic, and I know that the brand has moved on, but Jackson County is a place that works, right?
Nice.
We are a place that works. We have a workforce that works. We have a workforce that comes to work. We have an economy that works here. right? When you think of Michigan and manufacturing as a non-native Michigander, I will say you automatically think of automotive, right? Michigan, Detroit, automotive. Those are the
Yep.
three things, right? Um, and that is definitely something that is true for Jackson County. Michigan, automotive. Jackson, automotive. 60% of our manufacturers are supporting the automotive industry.
60%.
60%. That being said, though, we have 40% that do a lot of different things, from food processing to aerospace to, you met a gentleman that has a level 1 and level 2 infectious disease research laboratory, right? And an architecture and engineering firm that does transmission lines and substations across the country that have 150 civil and electrical engineers employed in downtown Jackson, right?
Yeah, Commonwealth is a
And
huge name, and they
yeah,
are from Jackson, plain and
yeah.
simple.
So you got to be exposed to some of those folks while we're here, right? But we are a place that works, right? We have companies that know how to work, that know how to build things better than anybody else. And it may be for automotive, it may be for an airplane part, it may be for a medical device or a medical instrument, it may be baked goods, right? And these are all things that we do. And
Oh, speaking of making things better than anybody else, I'll tell you, I finally cracked open the Bourbon Barrel Reserve wine that we got from the Sand Hill Crane Winery. Dude,
seriously, right?
oh my God. I've never
Did,
never had anything like it. Like
did you get
I finished it.
did you get the raspberry one or
No, I got that one and I got the like the tree sap,
yeah? Oh
the
yeah,
tree sap wine. I haven't tried that one yet, right? But what you feel like once you've been to one winery, you've been to all of them. That place, talk about innovation in maybe a stale industry, right? Like that little winery just down the road from your house, right?
yes,
That
just
little
under.
winery, like when I taste that Bourbon Barrel Reserve wine, like I thought, it's going to taste like everything else. No, it shocked me. So sorry, I just wanted to interject there that not only do you have these big guys making parts for aerospace and automotive, and you've got some really cool homegrown like mom and pop businesses that are doing things better than anybody else.
Honestly, it's funny. Craft beer and vineyards in Michigan is a thing, right? More
Sounds like a
so than
religion.
more so than I ever would have appreciated until I got up here. And I'm like, oh, I can look out of my office window and I can see 3, 4 microbreweries and micro distillery, a winery, right? I mean, it's true, right? Like you can see that. So it is it's a religion here, right? And
Yeah.
so there's
So it's a community that works, and on Sundays we go and worship beer and wine. Um, Sundays, every day of the week for me some weeks. Um, so
I'm just saying I am looking forward this winter to the Southern Michigan Winter Beer and Wine Festival.
I will have to come up for that one,
Absolutely.
definitely. So that's the foundation, the bedrock of your community, right? Let's ask this as kind of a lead to the outro here. What is your vision for Jackson? Um, Jackson's economic future in the next 5 to 10 years,
Yeah.
and tied into that, are there any emerging sectors in Jackson that you believe are going to drive that future growth?
Absolutely. So I think automotive will always be strong for us, right? We are so tied into the automotive industry. But what you just saw when you came this weekend and we toured one of our largest employers, who is in that transition from traditional belt-driven automotive parts to electric automotive parts, right? For that EV industry. I think you will see that continuing to happen. You will see that adaptability from our manufacturers that are here, right? I think there are a lot of opportunities with FDI for our community or foreign direct investment. Something that we have a handful of. I can think of 7 or 8 off the top of my head in Jackson alone that are foreign owned. I think there are other opportunities to help foster more of that investment into our community, um, in automotive and within outside of automotive. And so I think that's a real opportunity. I think, like every communities, in economic development, from the time I started to where I'm at now, things are different, right?
Right.
I spend more time. I would have never dreamed of spending the amount of time on livability or quality of place or even workforce development as what I do now, right? And so I think there are some opportunities along housing for Jackson County. I think there are some opportunities for that kind of thing. I think there are also some traditional economic development opportunities that we haven't taken advantage of here.
Mhm.
Spec buildings, and those kinds of things. We are ripe for that. With you guys this weekend, I had kind of a passing conversation about, boy, I know where I can probably start putting together 3,000 acres, right? And I've never had a mega site, right? But
Yeah.
can we get to that point, right? And so I think there are a lot of those kinds of opportunities. And then I think just, overall, it's, when you look at just the bones of economic development that you would look for when you come to a community, we've got an interstate. We've got US 127 that is essentially interstate standards, a split four lane with internet speed with interstate speeds, right? We've got land available. We've got a thriving downtown. We've got great restaurants and the wineries and the microbreweries and the quality of life. We've got 180 lakes in our county and 4 rivers, right? These
Yeah, the
are
amount of lakes and rivers just blew my mind.
It blows your mind, right? And so these are all things that are opportunities, right? I can have quality of life and quality of place here. I can find you a place for your business and a workforce for it so that you can thrive,
And I
right?
can probably also play enough rounds of golf in your community to last me a lifetime.
We have 22 public courses, 1 private course. So per capita, we have the second highest amount of golf holes per capita behind only Sarasota, Florida.
That
Blows
there's
your
something
mind.
there. Yeah, it really
Yep.
does. It really
Yep.
does, man. That's yeah, you guys have just, I mean, so much going on. And what's cool for you too is you come from much smaller communities, right? And so now that you're in this, this bigger tier two city, tier two, probably maybe tier three, but still
Mhm.
you're in the city, right? You've got the population. I saw your face light up when you said like the word megasite. Like, do I actually get to go after and like create a megasite, right? Because you have the workforce and the population to support something like that now,
Absolutely.
and you've got the land, right? Just like
Well,
you said, the Jackson, what was again the Jackson uh, Industrial Technology Park North. Did I
yeah,
get that right?
Jackson Technology Park North. Yep.
Jackson Technology Park North, right? I mean, the fact that you have that thing and folks, any other site selectors listening to this, I shouldn't be promoting it because it's such a gem and I kind of want it for one of my own clients. But this thing is lit up with all the utilities you need, right? Like it's plug and play, it's ready to go.
Yeah. Well,
Um,
yeah, and the things, like the thing I didn't mention is, I'm 30 minutes from in downtown Jackson. I'm 30 minutes from Ann Arbor. I'm 40 minutes from Lansing, from the state capital, right? Um, from Jackson County standpoint, our population of the counties, just the 8 counties that touch us, is 1.4 million people, right? And
mhm.
so you're pulling from a regional workforce that is the county next to you, right? It's not, sometimes as economic developers, I will be the first to admit we can kind of fudge a little bit on things, right? To say, oh yeah, that's our regional workforce, and yeah, of course it touches the north part of Indianapolis, right? When I'm in Wabash, even though nobody's probably commuting from Indianapolis to Wabash, right?
Yeah.
Um, you know, this is our regional workforce. This is the counties that touch our county, right? And there's an easy way to get there because we have interstates there, so
It's
it's not a big drive. So,
I had another community try to sell to me to that point, that it was a salient and relevant fact. When looking at a 5 state radius, their population was, and I was like, like 5 states, and this was not like in the Northeast where all the states are,
Yeah.
all up against each other. And my jaw just dropped. I mean, economic developers sometimes would literally say anything to get things going, right? And that's
Yeah,
fine.
right.
I've said it before, I'll say it again, right? Economic developer Devin would have been site selector Devin's worst nightmare because I was really good at that stuff too. So, man, you guys have it going on up there. And speaking of have it going on, right? Prowess, your community knows how to make things better than any other, right? You are strong in that. I want to hear how strong you are with your jokes, Mr. Gillenwater.
Oh man, so I thought about going like the one-liner Henny Youngman sort of, route, and so I had that one geared up, and it was going to be I was talking to my wife about doing this podcast, and she told me to, don't try to be too charming, don't try to be too witty, don't try to be too intellectual, just be yourself, right? But I'm not going to go that route. That's not the route I'm going. And so I'm going to take it down to its basis level, and I'm going with an animal walked into a bar joke, right?
Okay. Perfect. Hit me.
All right. So bear walks into a bar. He goes, bartender, I'll have a gin and tonic. Bartender says, okay, well, why the big pause? He's like, I don't know, genetics?
I don't know what my laugh is going to sound like when I play this back. All right, that was genuine. that was genuine. Oh man, and that was such a dad joke too.
Oh, I got a 10-year-old. Right? You have kids, and all of a sudden, like the sense of humor goes through the roof, and I love it. I embrace every bit of it.
Oh man, and on the flip side, right? For me, like if somebody asks me to tell a joke, I don't think I have one that I can tell in a public setting. I think all of my jokes are like would probably get me fired or put in jail. I just don't have any normal ones, so I need to work on that. I think
my son's favorite joke that he knows he can tell me that I will laugh every time is, what does a nosy pepper do? He gets jalapeno business.
Oh my god,
but
that's a good one.
Every time he tells it to me, I laugh, and I know what the answer is.
Yeah, right. Well, it's just it's good. Anyways,
yeah, it's awesome.
Dude, it's been a pleasure as always.
Awesome.
Keith, I couldn't be happier for you with your big move up to Jackson, Michigan. You kick butt no matter where you are, and that's why I wanted to have you on. Right, you really are. When I say an industry veteran, you're somebody I think that any economic developer that knows you looks up to you, and I mean that sincerely. You pull off a fantastic fam tour. Okay, if I put your contact info in the description of the podcast,
absolutely.
Anybody wants to reach out. Site selectors or economic developers, my man Keith is a good dude. So it's been a pleasure learning about the person behind the title with everybody listening to the podcast and the exciting developments going on in Jackson. So to our listeners, thank you for tuning in to Stories from the Road on Site Selectors Are People Too. And join us next time as we continue to humanize the industry and uncover the stories that help shape our communities. Keith, be well, bud.
Awesome. Thank you. You too, sir.
All right, cheers. Just a heads up, views expressed in this podcast are solely my own and are not attributable to any employers, whether past or present. Thank you.